Therapist perception.
Okay, so for Reactivity TV this week, Catherine was such a good host, a partner to me, and indulged me and let me. Not only did she watch The White Lotus season 2, but she agreed to talk about it with me this week because, as I shared on last week's episode, I cannot stop thinking about it. And so Reactivity TV this week will be about our therapist takeaways, our reactions to season 2 of The White Lotus. And so if you have not finished The White Lotus, there will be tons of spoilers, so you can fast forward on through to our main topic, which is gossip. But we have a lot to say. So we're actually going to do an extended version of our Reactivity TV on our YouTube channel, but we'll start with an initial conversation for this week's episode. So one thing we also wanted to know is that we're not going to necessarily be critiquing the show. Overall, we're really just going to be talking about, again, our therapist takes, our therapist perspective, our perception of some of the characters and the dynamics that we saw on White Lotus.
Mm-hmm. Here we go.
Yeah. Buckle up. There's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack. I mean, there were a lot of different storylines going on that all wove together somehow, and so we're gonna kind of break it down between the different characters, or at least the different groupings of characters.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So which group do you want to start with?
Let's go ahead and start with maybe the more exciting one, the one that you're most into, the couples.
The Spillers and the Sullivans.
Is that their last name?
Oh, yes. Catherine, I am in.
Wow.
I am in deep. Yeah. Okay. So we will, let's get into talking about the two couples. So obviously, this was the most kind of charged set of relationships that we saw, I think. So as for you, as a MFT, as a marriage and family therapist, someone who has studied relationships, works with people in relationships, like, I'm so curious to hear your perspective, your takeaway.
Yeah. Okay. So the main part that I want to talk about was, I mean, in general and over all of the storylines, that there was this main theme of sex in one way or another. And with the couples, we saw that very obviously, in terms of not having sex, in terms of infidelity, potential infidelity, skepticism, in so many ways. But one of the things around sex specifically that I wanted to bring up was about Harper and her coming to terms with, kind of coming to this realization of feeling like Ethan's no longer attracted to her because they don't have sex anymore. And so from my therapist perspective, like, thinking about problems in a relationship and symptoms of a relationship, those things are different. And people don't often think so. People often think that sex in itself can be the problem. And rather than it's a symptom of something else that's going on. So it's a lot more difficult to do when you're in the relationship and you're not working in a therapy room with somebody to really dive into. But what I wanted to highlight here was that there was clearly a lot more going on between Ethan and Harper that was leading to them not having sex anymore, or not as frequently, or whatever it really was. So sex is often an aftermath, or like an effect of something bigger going on in a relationship.
Right. That when they were talking about it, whether it was together or with the other couples, they were kind of noting surface, quote unquote, level issues like, oh, well, I'm more of a morning person and she's more of a nighttime person, or
stress at work.
Yeah, stress. Mm-hmm. And so like that's part of it. But as you're saying, it often lies deeper than that.
Right, exactly. And what lies deeper than that, it varies between couple to couple.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I guess I also just kind of wanted to note along with that is I believe that that couple in particular is in their mid-30s. I believe we're supposed to assume that they've been married for like 7-ish years, 7-8 years. And so it's not uncommon for couples at that point in their life or point in their relationship to or at any point really in a relationship to experience shifts in their sex life. And
or as soon as and you just bring up like transitions in relationships, or as soon as let's have a baby or let's not have a baby gets put on the table, mm-hmm. that can really cause shifts in a relationship.
Sure. Especially the meaning of
both people aren't ready or both people don't want it.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It puts such a different meaning on what sex is or is about. If that is like the primary focus. So yeah, that is such a good point, because it seemed like that was like her immediate go-to is, we're broken because you're not attracted to me anymore. I didn't hear Harper really talk about herself or her feelings about her attraction to Ethan or any of that. Clearly, it was a very symptomatic couple, which we kind of saw play out throughout the entire season. But as you're saying, their sex life or lack of one was just one indicator of that.
Yeah. What about you when it comes to these couples? What are you thinking about?
Gosh, so much. Just kind of like in regard to Ethan and Harper, I was just talking with one of our colleagues about this, but the way that they communicated was, especially around sex or even how they resolved, quote unquote, this issue, was very passive. They were really struggling to directly communicate and really hear each other and what they were saying. While I maybe were led to believe that this is a happy ending for them, that they were able to engage in some sort of sexual activity, they didn't actually address what any of the problems were. Right. In fact, they might have just piled on a couple of more problems in the way that they reignited maybe their spark for one another. So that also resonated with me, is like, again, this idea, and maybe they will be happy for a little while. We don't know, but we do know, at least what we saw, is that they didn't actually address what was causing that disconnect for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, talk about passive communication. I mean, mm-hmm. Harper just left. Well, at first didn't say anything when she found the condom in the couch, oof. And then decided to just leave it on the counter in the bathroom. Mm-hmm. To allow that to be the starter of the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And such a lack of boundaries, like across the board, particularly in the way that Ethan navigated his relationship with Cameron as it related to Harper, or just their relationship overall. It was, again, like all so very, very, very passive. And it's possible that some of that could be cultural. I don't know. But it is problematic. And ended up, again, resulting in them, I'm talking about now Cameron and Ethan, coming into a fist fight, getting physical. And yet again, nothing is communicated. Nothing is actually talked about. Nothing's resolved, and it seems like the wheel just keeps on turning. Mm-hmm. And so that was actually not my takeaway. My in addition to that stuff, the thing that really stood out to me was, especially in this last episode, Daphne talking with Ethan and talking about the role of having a little mystery in relationships. And she kind of said, like, mystery is a little sexy, don't you think? And I think that there is an aspect of that. Like, it is, Ethan had said at a different point to Cameron, like, it's hard to kind of have sex when you've seen each other on the toilet. Like, there is that element of kind of this lack of mystery that comes with being in a romantic, intimate relationship with someone for a lot of time. And so I was just thinking about, there should be a balance, right? Or it's healthy to have a balance between still kind of like keeping some mystery alive, in whatever way feels comfortable to you, you and your partner. And there is then kind of something that goes beyond mystery, which is omission.
Mm-hmm.
And just
right,
kind of not
the realistic
being honest with your partner about what you're doing.
Right. And the parts that some things that will naturally not be mysteries anymore, and coming to terms with again, kind of going back to this transition that happens in any long-term relationship, that there are going to be shifts in information shared or not shared, or being exposed to certain things that, like, yeah, to each their own, but being exposed to certain things that, of course, you wouldn't be privy to in the beginning parts of a relationship.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think perhaps maybe what we're both saying in terms of our main points are that, and something that we talk about a lot in Reactivity TV, because a lot of what we see play out are relationships, and relationships are hard. And I don't know, like, that statement is pretty vague. And I think what we're both saying here is that what makes a relationship hard or challenging is that it goes through so many phases and stages and transitions. And with that, it's almost as though you have a new relationship that you are learning, that you're attending to. And that can be challenging. And working with your partner to find kind of like a new way to express love to one another, a way that meets you both where you're at in this stage and phase of your life. That is hard.
Mm-hmm. And so with Ethan and Harper, for instance, he somehow came into a lot of money in his work, and it's pretty obvious that it wasn't discussed between the two of them. How does this now impact our relationship? What is changing between you and I now that our life looks very different? And that's what happens a lot of the times in in couples therapy work, where maybe it's couples who are empty nesters now, who don't exactly know how to navigate that time period. Any couple that is now at any transition point, they end up rewriting their marital contract. They end up really, changing with all of the things around them that are changing. And if that's not addressed, that can be really problematic.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think in the case of Ethan and Harper, we hear this conversation. Cameron asks them, like, so what's it like to be rich? And they're like, no, actually, it's not very different. I'm sorry, not possible. Not possible. We're able to help so many people. And then talking about helping Harper's family, that changes dynamics, like to be to provide financially for someone when you weren't before. I mean, so there's so much denial across all four of those individuals in that couple. And the rationalized belief that is what it takes to make a relationship work, is whether it's looking the other way or reframing it as mystery, or I don't know, but it seems to be, I use this phrase in another Reactivity TV, functionally dysfunctional for Daphne and Cameron. Somehow it works. I don't know what their setup is. And I'd be curious. And I guess that's the point of the show. We still like don't know totally the ending. We don't know what life is going to look like for Ethan and Harper, but I would recommend that they see a couples therapist.
Yeah. Or their relationship is now exactly what Daphne and Cameron's looks like. And it's all based on retaliation and infidelity.
Games. Yeah.
Games.
Well, we are going to continue talking about the other groups within White Lotus season 2, but we'll do the full extended version on our YouTube channel, which we will link in the show notes to follow along with the rest of our conversation. But if you don't see us over there, we're going to move on to our main topic today, which is gossip. Okay.
Who do you want to talk about next?
Let's talk about the men, the DeGrasso family.
Okay. You start with this one.
Okay. Well, first, it was first very, very challenging for me to not see Dominic, the middle generation,
as Chrissy,
as Chrissy Moltisanti. Although Michael Imperioli did do a really good job, because by the end, or not even the end, but like a few episodes in, I had completely abandoned that. So I just want to shout that out.
Although I will admit, I did keep calling him Christopher Moltisanti when I would be referring to him while I was watching. But I agree.
But this, okay, so we have Bert, who is grandfather, Dominic, who is father, and Albie, who is son. And it is this depiction of this family is such a great representation of just generational learnings, generational trauma, and how that really impacts from like one node down on the tree. And so we have 3 generations of, how the view of women has progressed or transpired across 3 generations, the view of sex and sexuality. And so I found that really, really fascinating and very, very well done. I was also kind of thinking about just, a lot of my work specifically is working with individuals who have experienced trauma, often relational trauma, or just people that have really challenging relationships with their family of origin. And so much of what we talk about is that there is so much that we learn, whether it's through things that are explicitly said or implicitly learned. And we saw that play out a lot in the way that Dominic engaged with his father and saying, like, I am this way because of you. I have this relationship with women and with sex because of what I saw you do with my mother, with your wife. And then we see Albie, who's, again, 1 generation down, who says, Dad, I saw what you did and I want to do something different. We hear Albie say that to Portia. I don't want to be like my dad. I want to respect women. And that takes him into a completely different path, Albie. But I found that so fascinating, because so much of what we talk about with clients in therapy are these things that we learn, are the ways that these learnings impact our lives, our relationships. And a lot of times we're doing a lot of unlearning of those things that we take in from our families. And so that I appreciated seeing a lot.
Yeah, I love the way you just described that how each of them communicated that to us and to each other, but to see how some of those things have changed and progressed over time and through generations was totally fascinating and so relatable to definitely the work that we do and to what people go through in just like from Albie's perspective too. Like, what people go through in observing what they were grown up with and trying to take certain things and trying to change certain things. And I think oftentimes people get stuck in, well, this is what I was taught, and so this is what I know, and that's all there is. And sometimes people get caught in the complete opposite of, this is what I was taught and I want nothing to do with it. And a lot of the work that we end up doing is kind of bridging those two things. And like, for those that don't know terms or anything, like this idea of differentiation, of finding autonomy but being connected to your family of origin, is a really difficult thing to do, especially when you can be pushed and pulled in so many different directions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, because it does, think about Albie in this situation. In a lot of ways, the way that he communicated to his dad, like, took a lot of courage to basically say, no, Dad, I'm not like you, and I'm going to take steps and make moves to differentiate myself from you. That actually is quite risky to do, and is really hard to do, especially when it's so, again, accepted, quote unquote, acceptable within your family. And so while I'm not the biggest Albie fan, for many reasons that have nothing to do with me being a therapist.
Tell me later.
As you're saying, like, that differentiation piece is so critical. And he, at being, it seems like, a recent college graduate, 23, 24, just developmentally speaking, that's when we form our identities as adults. And in order to do that, we need to take in kind of like the values, the lessons that we've learned from our families, and also kind of weigh them out and see, do they fit with the person that I am and what I value? And Albie, you can see him kind of like working that out, mapping that out, at risk to keeping his family together. So his dad said. So I thought that was really interesting. However, what we do see at the very end, sorry. What I will also say is that we see Dominic, who's kind of in the middle of his dad and his son. And it does seem like, while he's learned a lot from his father, he is really trying to learn from his son. Like, it seems initially like he's kind of like blowing off what his son will say. And then it seems like it sits with him. And then he'll say something to Albie, like, I feel like you must have the wrong impression of me. Or, I feel like you're saying this, but it's not really jiving with my experience. But he will kind of go and change or modify his behavior. So that is also a really interesting thing that we see in families as well, too. Like, once you receive some information about who you are or how your behavior impacts people, like, what are you going to do with that? And so I felt that was cool to see that Dominic was still open to kind of learning from his younger son, and particularly in an Italian American family where that's not typical. And it's very.
I was just going to say that often. Right. That often doesn't happen, that many times somebody, I mean, as much as Dominic could tell Bert. Mm-hmm. Okay. As much as Dominic can tell Bert what he thinks of him and what he needs to change, that there is, and as much as Albie could tell Dominic what he needs to do and what he needs to change, that, I mean, so often, I won't say more often than not, but so often when these things are expressed to a generation above our own, that it doesn't land, that there's not that change. And I mean, certainly not that immediate change. And yeah, it's a show. So like, it's going to happen a little quicker if it does happen. But you're right in that, like, a lot of times this actually doesn't resonate. And that's another thing that we end up working on with our clients, is doing the change that they can do and not trying to change others.
Mm-hmm. Right. I have two more, one quick thing, but one other thing that I wanted to add about the DeGrassos, particularly, again, that Dominic exchange between he and his father, and when he said to him, "I am this way because of you," and then he kind of had a caveat where he did also kind of take responsibility for his actions. Like, I could blame you, but I'm not going to. And I also kind of appreciated that too, because that is, again, kind of the dynamic that we sometimes work through in therapy, is like, it can be so helpful to really understand what has impacted us, what has shaped us into who we are and how we are. And we are still responsible for the choices that we make today. And so I, as a therapist, appreciated that, because that's also, it's so quote unquote easy to say, like, my parents messed me up. This is it. This is how I am. And like, that's also not helpful in helping you move past that and not impact whether it's maybe the next generation forward or your relationships present, things like that. So I wanted to note that. Yeah. And then my last thing was at the very end, when we see Bert, Dominic, and Albie in the airport, we see an attractive woman walk by.
Right.
And all three men kind of like notice, like turn their heads and so check her out. And so I thought that was kind of like a funny nod to, like, essentially let us know it takes time to reshape generational patterns, because Albie has these beliefs doesn't mean that he also didn't have other ones totally ingrained in him his entire 20-something years.
Right. Like father, like son, like grandson.
Mm-hmm. Right. Apples and trees. Right. Mm-hmm. Who's next?
Let's talk about Portia and Tanya. I'll go first with Portia. Pretty early on, when she gets kicked out of her job and has to hide away, and she's sitting by, I think it was when she was sitting by the pool and starts talking to Albie, and she says that she thought she was going to come to Italy and feel something, which on the one hand was her first day there. And so I don't know how realistic those expectations were. But on the one hand, and the greater point that I really do want to make is that still on the trip that she ends up having for herself, she keeps expecting something to really shift inside of her, and because of what's happening around her in her environment, like literally where she is in this most beautiful resort and a wonderful looking place. And then having these men attracted to her and having, going off and gallivanting with this guy, or two guys, that she's pretty evidently still very dissatisfied. And I think she uses that word at one point, that like she's not satisfied. And so what I really want to point out is how expectation that she had in changing her environment, and how she thought that would change completely how she felt. Mm-hmm. And I won't go ahead and like diagnose Portia here or anything, but it was pretty clear how she was experiencing some form of depression. And she was definitely going through something. So what her character did so well was illustrate how much your environment doesn't always play a part in how you overall feel.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, especially like the first couple episodes, Portia definitely said some things that were indicators of, you know, some depressive symptoms, 100%. But, you know, I think you're right. Like that internal sense of satisfaction comes from within, not externally, or maybe in order to experience it. And kind of Jack, as Portia referred to him, as deranged as he was, he had kind of said essentially, like, satisfaction is all about perception. Like, think about it. We're living at the best time, like, of the history of the world, which is kind of in a lot of ways up for debate, but in the way that he was describing it is accurate. And so sometimes it's all about kind of how we see the world, how we're looking at the world. And Portia, like, really did kind of sit with or kind of harp on the negative. Like, I'm stuck in my room. I'm going to just eat pasta. You know, I'm not going to have an adventure. Like, we hear her kind of complain and not see the forest through the trees, not literally lift her head up and look at that beautiful turquoise ocean, and that she's here on what I'm imagining is an all expenses paid trip to Sicily, a place that it doesn't seem like she would have been able to at that point in her life afford or experience if not for this job that she hates or this boss that, you know, is kooky. And so that's also a piece of it too, was she seemed, and that might have been like some of those like depressive symptoms really pulling her down and not really being able to kind of see some of these things. But you're right in that sometimes we do seek a lot of these external sources in order to help us feel better, but that's not sustainable, and it often leads to disappointment.
You're right in saying, like, she was turning to all these external things to make her feel something, but like in doing so was weighing so much on these things being the catalyst to giving her a shift in something, rather than actually focusing on what are things that could do that for me? What are things that are important to me? What are things that I want? What are things that I like, enjoy, etc., that could have done that much more sustainably, like you're saying.
Right. Well, as you're talking about that, it's making me think. At one point, she said something like, I think it was about Albie, but she had said like, I wish he made my pulse quicken a little bit. And even to him, she said like, maybe I just need to up my meds or something like that. But that is kind of what Portia sought, is kind of this like external excitement. Like, she was thrilled to kind of like walk out on the arancini bill, or like thrilled to kind of like be with this guy that's like gallivanting all around with her. And that is really avoidance. I mean, she wasn't asking herself those questions that you just were talking about. She was looking for a way to like feel something, rather than trying to an external way for her to feel something, or a source of that, like whatever, that pulse quickening, that dopamine hit, that serotonin rush, rather than trying to cultivate that internally, or maybe understand why it wasn't there to begin with.
Right. And I think it's no secret that we don't end up learning anything about her.
Well, she doesn't know who she is, I think, is
right.
Very clear by her wardrobe alone. She's, you know, it's kind of like she seems like she's on this journey to find herself, but she's running away from herself at every turn.
Absolutely. I think that, that's a great way to put it. It really, there could have been such a different story from that moment that she was sitting at the pool with her phone and like had this moment of telling Albie like, I don't know anything about me and I want to learn that and I want to figure that out. And that wasn't like, this wasn't a eat, pray, love story. So we didn't see that. But I still think what we did see was very valuable in terms of like how we were able to, what we were able to take away from it.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking that too. Like this, she did not take her eat, pray, love moment.
No, Portia, you had the eat, pray, love opportunity.
Maybe her next vacation.
Yeah.
So I guess that segues us to Tanya. Tanya, she took us on a wild ride. That one. So I guess with Tanya, it was kind of making me think of something I had said a little bit earlier in regard to the DeGrassos, in terms of the lessons that we are taught and how they impact our lives today. And so Tanya shares that when she was a little girl, her mom used to dress her up like a doll. And she would wait for people to come to play with her. And that is how she's navigated her life, is by, dressing up in these beautiful clothes and looking for some external source of affection, desire, attention. And that ultimately, literally led to her demise, that she had kind of learned that was her role. And that was the only way that she could earn love and affection is in these very, very superficial means. And it had her craving and so wanting for love and attention because it was always very shallow. Even at the very end, when she has murdered 3 people, Quentin is literally dying and she's still asking, was Greg cheating on me? And it's like, girl, he tried to kill you. What does it matter? But still feeling so insecure, so like wanting some validation in that relationship from this man that we're assuming was partly responsible for her death. I'm guessing. I mean, that was my assumption. But that was such an ingrained lesson in her. And it's kind of like what we talk a lot about in therapy as well is, awareness and insight are beautiful. They're amazing things, but applied awareness and insight are much more valuable. And so it's like, okay, Tanya had this great insight about how she internalized this lesson for her mom and how that is showing up in the way that she navigates relationships. And she didn't like put that to like actionable use. She just kind of missed the mark.
Mm-hmm. Right. Missed it entirely and doesn't know at all how others are viewing her, perceiving her.
Mm-hmm. Right.
To a degree of like thinking that Portia is a young version of her and that Portia would think that was a compliment.
That would make her receptive to what Tanya had to say. I mean, they were so similar. They were very self-involved. They were like so self-absorbed, so lost, so both seeking external validation, both seeking all of these ways to feel something that was outside of themselves. I mean, Tanya called the psychic made a house call. The psychic told her what she didn't want to hear and was like, no, this wasn't the point. You were supposed to tell me something positive. You were supposed to build me
up. You did this wrong.
And so they were both kind of similar in that way. They thought that they knew what they wanted or needed, but it wasn't fulfilling. It wasn't sustainable. Mm-hmm. R.I.P. Tanya.
Yeah. I have to say, she really kept me going. I was like, her comic relief was just amazing.
Yeah, it was definitely the much needed levity in a quite stressful show.
I mean, to like even just her just scampering along the side of the boat. when her phone falls and like walking so casually back inside.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, she was great. She was great.
Oh, so great.
Okay, who's left?
All right, so we have to talk about Valentina and then Lucia and Mia.
Mm-hmm. What an arc with Valentina, I have to say.
Yeah.
You know, I appreciated watching her journey as well. See this shift in her. And you know what we learn about Valentina is that she's gay, that she is attracted to women, and we see her kind of develop this crush on her employee. Oh God, Isabella. Wait, is that her name?
Yep.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And you know, we see her get a little smitten by buying her gifts and things like that. And we also see that Isabella is flirting a ton, and I mean it's mutual flirting with Rocco, and this, it seems like, is very problematic for Valentina. She kind of targets Rocco, kind of like calls him out, picks on him across the board. And so we kind of see this dynamic that really seems to be based in maybe her own insecurity or her own jealousy, because she you know has a crush on this woman. And so what we learn throughout the course of the season is that it doesn't seem like she's out, that she's not openly gay from what I can gather. But she also tells us that she's never been with a woman. She's never had a sexual experience with a woman. So there's all of this repression, possible shame, who knows? And then she has this experience with Mia, who makes her feel like sexy and attractive and desired. And it's as, I mean, her overall demeanor became so light, so playful, and we kind of watch as she's kind of come into her own a little bit more, own at least in part her sexuality, feel more secure in herself, feel more attractive, and then at the very end we see that she's much more comfortable in the dynamic that exists with Isabella and Rocco, where, you know, we hear her call his name, and we're waiting for her to, like, you know, call him on something, you know, who knows what. And she just says, like, good morning, welcome back. Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, it's such a good display of, you know, how much sometimes our own feelings about ourselves, our own insecurity, our own kind of like just view or experience of ourselves in the world can really shape how we view other people, and we might kind of like project our stuff onto other people when we're not totally comfortable with ourselves or with what's going on with us.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think she does go on this self-acceptance journey that her entire demeanor changes essentially overnight. And it was just a delight to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hope she continues to have a good time.
Yeah.
Speaking of having a good time.
Right.
That brings us to Lucia and Mia.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So like I was saying in the beginning, and like it's been so clearly out there for the both of us, that there was this big focus on sex in this season. And when it comes to sex for Lucia and Mia, that they use sex as power. And obviously we see that with the entire, my jaw was dropping, but with the entire ending of the two of them frolicking down that alleyway and
they had a very happily ever after.
Yeah, they did. And seeing smiling and laughing, saying hello to Alessio, who was allegedly the person that was stalking them, or, well, he was a lot of things, apparently a lot of things. That was just a ruse, and they're buddy old pals. So yeah, my jaw was dropping. But anyway, so clearly, Lucia used sex as power to gain Albie's trust, and ended up totally screwing him over and taking lots and lots of money. When it comes to Mia, and at first with Giuseppe and then with Valentina, that she was able to get into a position that she really, really wanted, to sing in the hotel and to live her dream. So yes, Lucia and Mia.
Yeah.
They really won.
Well, that's the thing, like, compared to season one, like the hard thing to kind of stomach at the end of season one is that the people with privilege just kind of, like, despite them causing all of this havoc, got to just completely walk away unscathed, and like their life went back to normal despite all this disruption. But that they really flipped the script on that this season. Like, the people that kind of made out were, Lucia and Mia, Valentina, even Portia. I mean, she's alive. The people that didn't come from means. All the other couples or all the other individuals were impacted negatively in some way as a result of their actions, and so that was interesting to see. But I mean, despite what judgments or opinions people have about, like, what one might call manipulative on behalf of either of Lucia or Mia, like, in a therapist frame, like, that's very, very adaptive. That is so resourceful. Lucia, yeah, she saw a young man that was caring and trusting, and he was a good mark, and she made her play, and she got her needs met. And in the grand scheme of things, as Albie said, what's $50,000 or €50,000? It wasn't that huge of an injury, to the family. But yeah, they both kind of did what they needed to do in order to get their needs met, to get their desires filled. And that's what people do every day to survive. And that's what it might have. They both had dreams. They both wanted to live dreams, and they figured out a way to get to living their dreams. And again, very resourceful, very adaptive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I think that's a good reframe around it too. I think, like, I mean, yeah, what they did was very manipulative. And I think when it came to Mia, well, I mean, maybe in both ways, because I think we saw it just in two different angles, but, like, they came at their problem, and problem either being like problem really being like money, and like, but really it was power. They came at it very innocently seeming at first, because I don't know how long this, like, ruse was going on, but they came at it from a very innocent way at first, and like with Mia, and not actually wanting to have sex with Giuseppe, and not and you saw how that that kind of, like, trope of male dominance and male power, and like, and women feeling like they need to do something submissive to help a man, or to get ahead. And so you saw that developing, and then you totally saw her flip it around when it came to Valentina, where she just totally took charge in a way that you weren't seeing before. And that's kind of what you saw with Lucia, in that she seemed distraught when she couldn't go back to Dominic's room the next night and keep going with that plan, that she seemed like she was at a loss, and yet flipped it around when it came to Albie and really took control back. So that was very interesting, the way that happened for the two of them.
Mm-hmm.
And just as far as like sex as power goes, that a lot of times in relationships that people are like, what can happen with sex being a point of contention in a relationship, or just like something that's not happening, or something that's happening, something that somebody's holding over somebody else, that it really is all about a dynamic, and like it's really all about whose hands is it in right now.
Mm-hmm.
It gets really intense, and it gets really serious.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not so much in the show, but just sex and power is a very interesting concept in itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, power, I think, was also a big theme overall, just throughout this whole season.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, this was a full, jam-packed, full reactivity to me.
Yes.
So,
and just going back to Amy's opening, I have to say, okay, the reason that you said it like that, I know, was because I told Amy that I didn't like the show. And I know we're not making this critique or anything, but since we're at the end, I do want to say that then taking a step back and having this conversation and looking at it through this lens, it does make me like the show a bit more. I mean, I wasn't ever not respecting the show. I think that like for what it was, they did such a good job. I just like was feeling like they could have squeezed this into an hour and a half movie. And then maybe I would have liked it. But no, this definitely gives me a little bit more of a like for it.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, and I know when we've talked about this show, what I've said I really like about it is the nuance, like how it does open up so much conversation about like all, because there's no one was a hero here. No one was all good or all bad. Well, maybe Cameron.
Yeah.
But
except it's really pretty.
Yeah, he's quite but I think I loved that because I felt like it was so human, like despite it being obviously a dramatized TV show, like there's so much humanity like in the characters, and I appreciated having to think about it in that way and in this way that we have. So thanks.
Well, they've already signed on for season 3. So I guess we'll come back and have to do it again.
Which because I am a nerd and I watch all of the inside each episode things, I learned that apparently the creator, director, Mike White, is thinking season 3 will potentially be in Asia and will be exploring themes of death, specifically like in Eastern religions and kind of in the backdrop of Asia, which could be really, really cool, really interesting. Yeah. So maybe, I guess we'll have to come back for that whenever that comes out.
Yeah, whatever that is.
Okay. Well, thank you if you made it this far, thank you for watching our full-length Reactivity TV, and we will be back next week for more.